Thanks for all your support at those raffles. We've been getting a great turnout there. And now I'd like to draw your attention to our guest speaker for the evening. Valerie Fortney is the author of Sunray, The Death and Life of Captain Nicola Goddard, which has been on the Globe and Mail bestseller list since it was published. Valerie is a journalist with a successful career in broadcasting, magazine, and newspapers. Her feature writing has appeared across North America and around the world in publications such as Chatelaine, the Los Angeles Times, the Reader's Digest International, and she has been writing and stimulating readers in Calgary and around the world since 1998. She lives in Calgary, and we're so pleased to welcome the author of Sunray here tonight, Valerie Fortney.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to try not to hyperventilate, and I won't use this, I promise. I'm sorry, I do have some talking notes because this is kind of a pretty special evening for me. I've basically run around the country, sometimes with Sally in tow, speaking to all kinds of news outlets. I've actually lost complete track of how many national TV broadcasts and newspaper interviews and the like, and radio. I think every single CBC station, and if I haven't hit them, I'm supposedly doing that on November 11th. But this is a special crowd for me, and it's, I hope you can understand why I'm a little bit more nervous. I'm looking out in a crowd, and many of the people here were people close to Nicola, and you know, from family to friends, and so many people who helped me in the writing of this book. So many people who knew and loved her, and here I am, the gal who never got to meet her, but was charged with writing her life story. So it was quite a challenge, but it was also an honor. I'm really happy to be here in Charlottetown for the second time in a year, and even if it is pouring rain and it's 16 above in Calgary and sunny. And also, I didn't pack a raincoat or an umbrella for coming to PEI in November, so you can tell I'm really a Western girl. It was raining all summer in Calgary, so now I'm here and it's raining here, so that's great. I have so much to thank Tim and Sally for, but for right now I'm just going to thank them for inviting me here tonight and to share in this great evening, this great fundraiser. It's my second time I've been at one of the Light Up the World fundraisers for Nicola's project. It's kind of funny, as I've been going around the country talking about Sunray, and you know what, I'm just going to tell you first of all, because there are people here who haven't read the book, and Sunray, in the introduction I explain, and I think it has, for me it had so much resonance, connected with Light Up the World as well, connected with Nicola's sunny disposition and beautiful smile that she shared with the world. But Sunray is also the military term for the boss, and that's why I loved that title, because she was the boss. It's not gender specific. It refers to the boss, and she was the boss of her unit, and on the day she died, she was the boss with another soldier, another officer of more than 200 soldiers. And the death and life of Captain Nicola Goddard. We flipped that. I spoke with my editor, the wonderful Linda Prusen at Key Porter. And we flipped that because Nicola was so famous for her death. And few people, Canadians, knew anything about her life. So as I've been traveling across the country, I've become very well acquainted with questions people ask about the book, and it's given me a really good insight into what sparks people's curiosity. But there's a divide between the people that ask me the questions. Some interviewers, a really good number of them have read the book, which is really nice to talk to people about your book when they read it. And I often get engaged in very spirited discussion with them about Nicola, about all the interesting characters along her life's journey that influenced her. And those conversations have been some of my best interviews, leads to a more philosophical conversation about all of our journeys. And how the people we meet and the places we see and touch down on influence the direction our lives take and the choices we make. But for those who haven't read the book, and those interviewers, some of them try to fake it, and I know it right away. I've always asked the same two questions from the people that just don't get around to reading the first 5 pages of the introduction before speaking to me. And I'm not angry about it. It's kind of funny. Being a journalist, being interviewed by journalists, they haven't done their homework. That's okay. But they ask me, you know, why, out of the 152 soldiers who have died in Afghanistan, since Canada joined the mission in 2002, why a biography on this particular soldier? Is it because she's a woman? And I always get that asked very suspiciously. Were there qualities about her that just made her stand out so much more from the others? And they also ask, well, why you? How did this gal from Manitoba and, who made her way to Calgary with no connections to the military and who had a whole lot of homework to do to write some of those military chapters, and thank heavens for these soldiers and officers who spent countless hours on the phone with me explaining 10 times over what artillery does, what all these different arms. How did I become Nicola's biographer? Well, I'm just going to touch on some introductory points. And I'm sorry, some of you know this, but it's kind of a Introduction to Sunray 101 for people who have yet to read the book. But there are some introductory things very early on that told me and convinced me very quickly that Sunray was a story that was destined to come alive, whether it was going to be me or another author. On May 17, 2006, Captain Nicola Goddard, a junior officer based out of Canadian Forces Base Shiloh, was selected along with another junior officer to lead more than 200 Canadian and Afghan National Army soldiers into the Panjwai district, south of Kandahar city. The aim that day was just to do a routine sweep of the area, routing out any insurgents that may be hiding among the local villagers. But primarily it was an exercise typical of the Canadian military throughout its time in Afghanistan. It's a mix of diplomacy, getting to know the locals, letting them get to know the Canadians, and it's also as a show of might to let the villagers see that they could rely on our soldiers, that we were capable, strong, and we were willing to come face to face with the insurgents if they decided to show up. The military intelligence that was provided by NATO to Task Force Orion, the rotation of 1,000 soldiers led by Lieutenant Colonel Ian Hope, had been telling them that there was about 200 Taliban massing in Kandahar province and in some of these villages. Unfortunately, those numbers were horribly wrong. In the end, Ian Hope, who was an amazing help on this book and one of my guardian angels to help me tell this story of the Afghan chapters, they estimated later that the number of insurgents in that area was likely more than triple, possibly quadruple the numbers he was given. But you didn't have to tell Nick or her fellow soldiers that those counts were off, because within minutes of them arriving at their destination, they found themselves in a pitched, hours-long battle with the insurgents. It was the biggest, longest-lasting fight Canadians had fought in Afghanistan since they began arriving there 4 years earlier. And it was in this little-known region of the country that in time would soon become infamous for the shedding of so much Canadian blood. That early part of the day, it was a victorious one for those soldiers. That morning, Nick and her team called in the first fire mission against an enemy combatant since the Korean War a half-century earlier. To those of us in the civilian world, it might not seem like something to get all excited about, but as Ian Hope would tell me years later when I interviewed him, it really was a monumental achievement for those soldiers. They were trained to do a certain job, and for the first time in decades, they were finding themselves in a position where they could do it for real. As one of Nick's forward observation team members, and she was part of this special unit of 5, the forward observation team, her bombardier, Chris Gauthier, said, he told me later, he said to Nick, "We're the ones going down in the history books. We're the ones whose names people are going to know." So as we all know later, as the sun was setting that night, the Canadian and their Afghan allies prepared to retreat for that night, to get some rest before they found themselves back out there fighting the Taliban. As Nick and her second-in-command, Jeff Fair, they were armpits out of the turret. They scanned the landscape for signs of activity, and they were ambushed. 3 rocket-propelled grenades hit Nick's light armored vehicle simultaneously, and a fluke ricochet of shrapnel from one of those RPGs killed her instantly. And that day, May 17th, was her father's birthday. Within hours, Canada and the entire world would hear the news of the 16th Canadian soldier to die in Afghanistan. And we all know now that historic first that silenced all the other firsts that Nick experienced on that day. She was the first female Canadian soldier to die in a combat role in our nation's history. So a few months after Nicola's death, my journey to writing Sunray was just beginning. But I didn't really realize it at the time. On a beautiful fall day in October that year, my editor-in-chief called me into the newspaper, into his office, and he said, "I've got a great assignment for you." The parents of Captain Nicola Goddard are interested in speaking and sharing her story, and we'd like you to do a 2-day series on her life. And I said yes without hesitation. I hadn't been involved in the stories of Nick's death. I was on vacation when this happened back in May. But I'd been following every single story, the memorials, the tributes. I'd heard enough about her and her family to be completely intrigued. And another point about the first female was, it was important, but Calgary had a certain conceit, and I've always found this really interesting. We, from day one of her death, described her as Calgary's Nicola Goddard. It was partly because Nicola never lived anywhere for more than about 4 years, and she and her family had lived in just about every corner of Canada. So when she died, different publications and broadcasts, news broadcasts across the country said Saskatchewan's Nicola Goddard, Antigonisha's Nicola Goddard. That's where she graduated from high school. Alberta, Edmonton's Nicola Goddard, where she graduated from junior high school. Baffin Island's Nicola Goddard, where she went to elementary school. Black Lake First Nations in northern Saskatchewan. And so on and so on. But Calgary being the kind of place it is, we were really sure she was our Nicola Goddard. And that was because, as Nick would often write, she wrote in her letters, I've seen it many times, she always said, I list Calgary as my home because that's where my parents are. Wherever my mom and dad are, that's where I list as home. She was an adult woman. She'd been married 3 years. She was 26 years old, and her and Jay, her husband, lived at CFB Shiloh, hoping to move eventually in the next few months when she got back to Wainwright, where her next posting would be, and that's Wainwright, Alberta. So really, this is how the initial series about Nicola Goddard started. So I found myself that fall in one of the most challenging but rewarding situations for a journalist. I was meeting these incredible people who kind of defied my own naive stereotyping in my head about where do soldiers come from and how is a soldier made? Oh, these pacifist educators that travel the world rebuilding education systems in far-flung, impoverished places. They've got this daughter who is going to be known as the first female soldier to die. But they were really determined to tell me all the stories about her. I learned about this little toddler who was trained by her Papua New Guinean tribeswomen caregivers how to cut open a coconut with a machete. She was 2. There's a part in the book where Tim almost has a heart attack when he comes home early one day and sees his 2-year-old with a machete in her hand. She was the grade schooler who learned to speak Dene while living on the Black Lake First Nations in northern Saskatchewan.